Well, Brian, thanks for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you. I know you're the assistant director in charge of cyber at cyber division at the FBI, and maybe you could tell us a little about your background and what you do at the FBI.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me today. At its most basic level, my responsibility here at FBI headquarters is for the cyber program for the FBI. And that means that we have strategic and tactical responsibilities operationally and across intelligence lines of efforts to essentially guide the work done in our field offices and to provide goals for those field offices. But I think it's important, and I think your audience will know this, that our field offices is really where the FBI's true work gets done. And so we have obviously a lot of cyber capability throughout our 56 field offices. We have cyber trained assistant legal attaches in 16 offices globally. And that's where the work gets done. And so that's just a really good overview of my role. And from a mission perspective for the FBI cyber program, we say this, when we're looking at an adversary, how do we combine with the most relevant, impactful private and public sector partners, both domestically and globally, to build strategic disruption plans so we have sustained impact against our adversary? And so it's really the imposition of cost model that I think the intelligence community has really coalesced around and that we're proud to be part of.
Yeah. No, and look, having worked with you all in a variety of ways, including the NCFDA and a bunch of cases, the field offices do an amazing job. And, I think one of the goals of today is to sort of crosswalk and translate things. And I think, disruption is kind of the flip side of resilience. And when we're talking in the private sector about private companies, there's really four things companies manage themselves to, which is strategy, resiliency, legal compliance, and financial performance. And when you're hit with ransomware, you're hit with by one of these gangs, they're trying to disrupt the business, right? And the business is trying to be resilient. And part of the way the business becomes resilient is that organizations like the FBI are able to disrupt the disruptors, basically. And that's really how tightly this wraps in. And, I think one thing that is not always understood in the private sector is that, they expect it to be like TV, and you guys come in and, and in 44 minutes on a TV show, arrest somebody. And it takes you all naturally a long time to build the case the right way. And maybe just from, start to maybe finish of you getting a case ready, maybe help people understand how long it typically takes in cyber to get to the point where you can disrupt, who to disrupt, because you don't want to disrupt the wrong person.
Yep. Let me answer that, and I'll give you a little bit more background about how we look at really four dedicated lines of effort. But, in short, you're right. I mean, it could take us 6, 9, 12, 18 months to fully build out the infrastructure where we know that if we take disruptive action, that it has some sustained impact. Certainly, if we want to move on a more expeditious timeline, we can take disruptive action, but the sustainability of that disruptive action could literally be measured in less than hours. And so our goal is to maximize disruption and disruptive capacity against the adversary while also minimizing damage for victims. And that's always a fine balance for us about when we are at that point to take disruptive action. But to your point, it's a very, very long process. I do think that it's important for victims to understand that some of what we need immediately after intrusion is time sensitive and some of it is not. And so the time sensitive intelligence pieces generally are virtual currency wallets as well as logs. But we know with the safe haven problem that has an ROI that is lower than we would prefer. But just some numbers, in the last 2 years, we have extradited about 25 criminals from across the world back to the United States. We'll always play that long game because it's what the American public expects from us. The second is, how do we leverage our domestic intelligence as access to inform net defenders and the resiliency of victims here in the United States or just general corporations here in the United States. So taking the results of our investigative work and pushing them out from a net defense perspective to ensure that we're leveraging our domestic access to inform and to assist. The third is pressuring the threat, right? How do we apply pressure, whether that's a speed bump to a high hurdle, in real time as a result of our partnerships and our investigative work to bring friction to the adversary. And we see this recently with Black Hat and the back and forth of the splash page, right? Like, it is very important for us to hold serve on that splash page for a few reasons. Number one, the victim expects it, or the American public expects it from us, but we have to fight the adversary on their terms, and we're willing to do that. And then the fourth is being victim centered, right? It is extremely, extremely important for us to continue our 115-year legacy of being victim centered. While we are not perfect, our goal is to become perfect over time, right? And anything that a victim needs in the aftermath of a intrusion, we like to say we're willing to do whatever we can. I think it's worthy discussing here, Andy, when you're ready, about what are those things we can do before or during an intrusion. But I'll pause here.
Yeah, no, and look, I think the only thing I'd add there is it's why information sharing from the private sector is so critical, because the reality is it's not that I'm in any way critical of the time it takes you guys to get to the point where you can have sustained disruption, right? That's what you have to do if you want to be effective. Because if you go too early, to your very good point, it won't hold and you just burned all your intelligence. And so that's why it's so critical for the private sector, even if there's not, an immediate return on the investment, to realize this is a long game, and everyone's safer when sharing happens. Even if your event isn't the one that's disrupted, you may be saved, a year later when they don't come back. And Brian, DOJ and FBI recently released guidance around the new SEC reporting rule to help victims figure out when they should or shouldn't report within the 4 business days of the materiality determination. What insight can you give us on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When we continue to just mature the internal and external processes for, I would separate it into 2 distinct workflows, right? Workflow 1 is engage with the FBI early. That's always consistent with our guidance to all of our partners, or to quickly exchange some very specific pieces of intelligence, but also for the FBI to allow and afford the victim the opportunity to ask questions about the SEC reporting guidance. And we hope our field offices and expect our field offices can be a really good consultant in those times about what is likely to qualify for a disclosure delay and what is not. So that's really workflow 1. Workflow 2 is you think you've met the criteria outlined in DOJ's guidance, or based on conversations with your FBI field office, you think you want to submit a request for a delay. That is a central intake system that we manage, and all of this information is available on fbi.gov/SEC. And essentially, there's 7 questions that we're asking for answers to. For experts and knowledgeable folks in the space, none of those 7 questions are going to catch anyone off guard. We're not asking for privileged information in any way. But we'll take those the answers to those questions, and really the FBI's role is to engage with the intelligence community agencies and the sector risk management agencies to do equities checks, then prepare a package and evaluate the package, and then provide that to DOJ for ultimate decision. So 2 distinct workflows, really armed at informing the victim about their options, and then secondly about how we actually execute.
Yeah, I mean, look, the takeaway is get to the bureau early and engage. And I think one of the things that's gotten lost in the swirl is it isn't 4 business days from the date of the event. It's 4 business days from the date you determine it's, reasonably could be or is material, but that doesn't mean necessarily you want to wait to that point to engage the bureau because it just gives you all more time to get teed up to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I'll just add 2 refined points. Number 1 is the early engagement with the FBI in no way triggers materiality. And so I think that's just important for victims to know that's safe space, really separate and apart from that materiality determination. The second thing we've been asked is, hey, FBI, will you share with SEC what we share with you prior to the submission for a delay request? The answer is no, right? That's internal victim-centered conversations. We're very, very responsive to victims' rights in that space, and that's obviously well contained in terms of who would have access to that information that's shared.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful to know, because look, that's always been one of the debates you have in the private sector is if you're going to tell, the FBI do you have to start telling other agencies, right? And I think that kind of clarity from the Bureau is really helpful in knowing that it's not going to go over to the SEC. Because look, these things, everyone thinks these calls are easy to make and they're black or white. And as you know, and I know from doing it, like these are very gray calls a lot of times. Like there's some that are clearly material, right? There's a lot of them that you could kind of go either way. And look, part of the engagement with the FBI is to get a sounding about sometimes the who really matters, right? And the who for materiality could matter. And it may offer clarity to the victim to get intel back from the Bureau, which you guys are very good at doing, to help refine the materiality analysis as well. So I do think it'd be great to turn to kind of what you all can do and how you can help the private sector. I think that'd be a great discussion.
Yeah, we break it down into 3 phases, right? The before intrusion phase, the during intrusion phase, and the post intrusion phase. But the most critical is the before intrusion phase. It's where we and a company or an organization need to build trust and need to talk about expectations. And when there's tension or strife during an engagement by the FBI during an intrusion, it's almost always because there hasn't been a level set of expectations on both sides. We think that things such as bilateral intelligence sharing with a reciprocation from both parties in the before intrusion phase is really important. We think it's really important for a potential victim or a corporation to say, hey, listen, if we do suffer an intrusion, here's how we want the FBI to engage with us collectively, including of outside counsel, third-party IR, negotiators, et cetera. But there has to be a real clear delineation of expectations and adherence to those. Part of that is understanding what we can and can't do, or what we will or won't ask for. We still, unfortunately, suffer from people saying, okay, we're ready for the FBI to come in and fully remediate our systems. We have never done that. We never will do that. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry built around that. In fact, I was thinking the other day, in close to 3 years in my job, I know of one time an FBI agent put hands on a keyboard, and that was after a victim specifically asked to ensure that they were taking servers offline safely to protect forensic evidence, right? It was at the request of the victim. But those common expectations are super, super important. Part of that also is, what is the FBI going to need in the immediate aftermath to facilitate our goals, but also what can wait. And I already alluded to this, but it's really virtual currency wallet and logs, right? Those are really important in the immediate aftermath so that we can do our work before infrastructure gets torn down. During the intrusion itself, obviously, there's a lot of players involved. You obviously know that in your role, Andy, and we're super respectful, I hope, and I think, of those roles by outside counsel, and we have no problem plugging in through them accordingly. One thing I would like to just touch on, we have victims still today that, 5, 6, 7 years after their intrusion have said to me, hey, we just really appreciate all of you continuing to keep us updated 5, 6, 7 years later. It just makes us feel part of the team. And we just talk about long haul cooperation a lot. I'll just end with, it is very difficult to scale victim engagement across what are 13, 14 million organizations in the United States. And we can't get everywhere. So we do have to prioritize. But that's generally how we look at our victim engagement, how we try to coach ourselves and potential organizations who may become victims through the process.
And look, I think at some level too, there's confusion in the U.S., even among private sector, between, and I know the FBI has a role in the intelligence community, but you're a law enforcement agency primarily, right? And other entities have different roles and can do things that the FBI can't or doesn't, and that's kind of, it's learning who's who, right? Because you have to know who has what statutory authority, who has what ability, technical ability, and again, even if you have the technical ability, you may not have the statutory authority to do something that the NSA can do overseas, right? And that's where I think a lot of confusion happens with the private sector. And people in my role, we try to sort of get people squared away, but it's not easy, and not everyone has the sophistication internally to know. And I think that's why it's important to really get out there. And I think it's critical for people to understand, what the FBI's primary mission is, because that, what you can do flows from, why the entity exists.
Yep. No, I think that's very well said, Andy.
Yeah. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for taking the time, and we'll definitely be talking to you again in the future.
Thanks, Andy.